Hey everybody, welcome back to Walking with Jesus Daily. This is the recording for day 336. We have covered many of the apostles, over half of them now, haven't we? Judas, okay. We got Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip, Nathaniel, and Matthew. Yep, that's 7. And we're going to continue on. The next one that just seems to be right to cover would be the one who would oppose Matthew. Remember, Matthew was a tax collector. He was a Jew. He was hated by his own people, seen as a traitor, and then followed Jesus and hated even more than a tax collector. But he followed Jesus. And Jesus also called a zealot. Now, we can look up what zealots were. We can know what zealots were. And we can understand that a zealot would have been quite a bit opposed to a tax collector. They were a slightly militant group. They caused uprisings. There's a chance that there were zealots on the crosses next to Jesus. Who knows, right? Calls them robbers, but this term can also be used for a couple different things. They were trying to take matters into their own hands, perhaps, but we have one that was a zealot, and his name happened to be Simon. Now, we started with Simon, also renamed Peter, but this is Simon the Zealot. And there's not a whole lot of information about him. But it is very interesting that a zealot named Simon would be chosen by Jesus, as well as a tax collector named Matthew, chosen by Jesus, right? The story goes of Simon the Zealot that he ministered in Persia and eventually was killed, martyred, after he refused to sacrifice to the sun god. Now, we all know very well who the God of the sun is. His name is God, Almighty, Omega, Alpha, Jehovah, Adonai. Yeah? The one who spoke the sun into existence would be the God of the sun. There is no other God. And I imagine this is a lot like how his conversation went when he refused to sacrifice to this evil entity that people worshipped as a god of the sun. Now, it talks about his end being somewhat unclear, because unfortunately, politics get involved in everything. And eventually, I think it was after 300 AD with Constantine, Christianity became the, quote, official religion of the Roman Empire. So then it became a political advantage to be connected with any of the apostles or notable Christian leaders. Now, at this time, there was no apostles still living. What this means is that places like Turkey, Greece, Rome, Jerusalem, they naturally had more power and influence than the churches in places like Britain, France, Africa, and Spain. Now, even though we don't know for certain about the full life of Simon the Zealot, We do know that he was titled as a zealot. We do know that he was titled as an apostle. We do know that he gave up the life in his sect and decided to follow Jesus. Did he follow Jesus because he thought that that Jesus was going to lead an earthly kingdom and overthrow the Roman Empire? Who knows? Did he follow Jesus because he wanted to see the truth and loved him and believed? I don't know. We're not told that specifically. What we are told is that he followed Jesus. That he left something that he believed in completely. That he was dedicated to completely. He left. He left to follow Jesus. And when he did that, it's really hard telling how difficult it was to leave behind who and what he once was. Matthew could walk away from being a tax collector. Peter, Andrew, James, and John could walk away from fishing. But to walk away from a sect that was, to say the least, quite hardcore might be a little more difficult. This might have been like trying to walk away from a gang. I don't know. Now, as we look further into zealots, we see that they had a very passionate devotion to their Jewish faith, first and foremost. And because of that, they had a complete hatred of Roman rule. The zealots were actually a political movement. They wanted to overthrow Rome in Judea. We are unsure of if Simon was militant. We're unsure of his beliefs. But here's what we do know is that when you have a person who is passionate and devoted and willing to fight a battle that they cannot win, Jesus handpicked this man. Maybe because of the fight that was in him. You may have that fight in you, but more likely you know someone who has that fight in them. I do. And I pray so hard for this person and for these people that they see the truth. Because they're passionate people. They're people who do not back down from the truth. And even though they may be misguided currently, even though they may be deceived right now, even though they may be the most stubborn person you could possibly think of that will never, ever change, when you pray and God works, incredible things happen. And I have seen the most stubborn people in my life, the most staunch people against Christianity, completely change their life. I have seen people change, and not because they chose to, because that's the power that God holds. You want to see a real miracle? Simon was called, and he went. And he went with all that passion. He went with all that fight. He went with the way that God made him. And his fight now was no longer a political battle, but it was a battle of love. It was a battle of taking the gospel of peace and a loving God to a world that opposed him. See, Simon wasn't afraid to fight. He wasn't afraid to go into a battle that he knew he was outnumbered. Simon was an apostle who was passionate. Look at the characteristics of each one of these men and see how they were put together. See the army of 12 that Jesus assembled. Jesus assembled. Think about and pray about the people who need Jesus, who you think won't accept him. And if you're that person, please surrender to the goodness of God, because he loves you so much. I love you guys. I'll see you tomorrow.